Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful multiverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And I want to begin by saying hello to Proxonea, or I'm sorry, Proxones in the chat room. And hello, Proxones. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments directly onto whatever platform you're watching on, and they'll show up here in my chat room. And Proxones is our first person in the chat room. It's good to see you today. And one of the things I like particularly about this program as opposed to other programs that I have done is this ability to to talk directly with people. Now, today, I had a little bit of difficulty loading the programs for the week. So there might be one or two channels we're normally on that we're not coming to you on today, but that should not be the case for the rest of the week. And we should be on most platforms should be looking for us. And I don't know about you, I had a heck of a weekend. Hello to Christine in the chat room. Hello to Renee in the chat room. And Proxones says in the chat room, deep in the forests, hidden in the worlds of mysterious cyberspace, waits a world of forgotten dreams about magic and technology. Well, yes, you're absolutely right. And Proxones says, will you become a grand master of technomagic? I'd have to say that I would consider myself to be a grand master of technomagic, along with Ed the Pagan. I think that we have been among the pioneers of this particular art form. So yes, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to seeing many more people excelling in technomagic. And hello to Antonio Huerta in the chat room. It's good to see you, Antonio. And one of the things I've talked about on this program is my belief that through technology, we are beginning our transition more greatly into the astral plane, that in a manner of speaking, we're physicalizing it. I think we're going to see a lot more magic involving technology, even during my lifetime. Even within the context that I'm in the last portion of my lifetime, I think it's coming that quickly. And I think that the magical aspects of technology are, for most people, barely thought of, but extremely fertile. And it's going to become not only a major aspect of our magical lives, but in a mainstream sort of way. And most people, I think, will be using technology in a magical way without ever realizing they're doing what's traditionally been called magic. So techno magic, I think, is very much the way of the future. And thank you, Prexones, for pointing this out. It's a very wise comment. Speaking of magic in mainstream ways, my topic for today is art and allegory. And I came up with the idea for this topic from a conversation I had yesterday. This weekend was the occasion of the St. Louis Pagan Picnic. I did not personally get to go this year because I'm very much involved in setting up Gaia Thrift, of which you'll be hearing much more in the near future and possibly in this broadcast. And hello to Jessica in the chat room. But I had great fun watching people posting photos from it and seeing people that I normally would only see this one time a year. And it was great fun. And I did end up having a conversation with someone who lives far from me that brought up the subject of allegory. And I thought, I write about this in the first degree lessons as being one of the great achievements of pagan thought. But it's time, I think, to talk about it again And I'm going to do that today. Now, Proxones says, I use my screen as vision board so far, but there's not much known about technomagic to me. Um, Technology really, again, is physicalizing so many of the things that were formerly spectral in the magical world. We'll have to do a show on that subject by itself sometime soon. Um, and even things like visualization have been becoming increasingly physicalized during the last 100 years. And hello to Janet in the chat room, and I suppose that actually has some relevance to today's topic. So there's a lot of thought that the development of writing drastically changed the way that people looked at themselves and the way that they thought. And my personal point of view, which I write about, I believe, in Third Degree, is that while this has some truth to it, um, a lot of it also has to do with the development of portraiture and the change that made to how we venerate our ancestors and therefore how we see ourselves. To actually to be able to preserve our image, I think made a big difference in how we looked at the past. It became less legendary and more immediately tactile. And certainly writing did that too. But I think that the visual aspect, which we see first really developed in ancient Egypt and then throughout the Middle East, gave people a way of attaching to the past that they had never had previously, which also changed the way they looked at their own lives. And in particular, it changed the concept of self. Prior to this, it certainly appears that people did not really think of themselves in the same kind of individualistic way that we do now. And in fact, even long after this, many people did not. They thought of themselves rather in terms of whatever role they played in life and how close they came to it. And hello to Mary Cavalcante in the chat room. It's wonderful to see you, Mary. You can still see this in certain movements, which constantly hold up an archetype of how you should be. And certain conservative Christians are very much like that. If you're not exactly that archetype, then something must be wrong with you. And that, I think, is a way of thinking predating really the sense of self, because self and individuality really have no place in it. And I see that not in a very positive light. I'm a great believer in the importance of individuality. And, I'll go so far as to say that the development of culture, the development of society is greatly enriched by the variety of people in it. I'm a great believer in the idea that when many different forms of doing things come together, wonderful new forms are developed. And Christine in the chat room says, we had a wonderful time at the St. Louis Pagan Picnic. The rituals were so good. My daughter and granddaughters enjoyed the rituals as well. They're old enough now to better understand what's going on. That's wonderful. I always love the St. Louis Pagan Picnic. I think it's my favorite of all pagan festivals, obviously than lustration. And hello to Zane in the chat room. But of any of the places that I commonly go, the St. Louis Pagan Picnic has usually been my favorite. That and also some PPDs that I go to. Not to say that all of the festivals aren't good, but for my personal favorites, this would be it. Now, getting back to the subject, I am not a believer in the idea of purity. I think that it is a badly misguided idea. I believe rather in the idea of hybridization. I think if you look at history, when you see societies that are built up from multiple populations that have come together, I think you'll see they're far more robust, far more innovative, and move forward much faster than isolated societies do. Now, I will grant you they both serve their purposes. They both have a reason for being, or they wouldn't be. But certainly for me, I love the more cosmopolitan society that we have when many different things come together. And um, I think that the development of artwork has a lot to do with that. As I say, many people tie it to writing. And one of the things you'll notice is that people were very impressed with themselves when they learned to write. Writing appears to have developed simultaneously in the Near East with cuneiform and in Egypt with hieroglyphics, simultaneously and separately. There are also theories that writing may have developed also in certain parts of Europe, but they really haven't been proven yet. But I wouldn't be surprised. One of the things I see studying history is that it does seem like certain things happen separately and simultaneously, historically, on many occasions. It's why many of the great historical teachers seem to have lived within the same couple of centuries of each other, in my opinion. To find writing developing in several different places doesn't surprise me. But I don't know that I agree. I think that for myself, I think the development of portraiture has a lot more to do with this. And when I was growing up and you read books on artwork, they would tell you that the Egyptians were not good portraitists. Their artwork was all very stylized and presented only idealized versions of the sitter, whereas the Greeks and Romans were so far superior with their individual portraits, especially the Romans. And that might have been a reasonable assumption based on what was archaeologically known at the time. But if you look at Egyptian artwork from what is known today, they were great portraitists at a very early place. Um, they were very good at creating very individual portraits, usually of the deceased for their tomb, but presumably also for the public square during life. Those things we don't have as much of. The artwork that survives largely comes from tombs and temples, but there was undoubtedly much more. And there are examples that come from other places in Egyptian history. One of the things that's most interesting about Egyptian artwork is that their stone sculptures are the primary thing that survives, and their frescoes, their wall paintings. But they also worked in wood. And those wood sculptures that survive, though far fewer because wood does not preserve quite as well and was probably used less often because of the local climate, but it allowed them a greater plasticity in their portrayals of people. And you see, in many cases, even more superior portraits when done in wood. But the stone portraits of many of those early people are clearly recognizable as individuals. Um, and hello to Vivian in the chat room. And Vivian says, I live in St. Louis, but I can't go to the pagan picnic anymore. I've been taking my three kids, 13 years old and twins 12 years old, the last few years, but I end up super broke every time. And even worse when it's just me. I totally get that. There are so many wonderful things at the St. Louis Pagan Picnic. I can see that it would be very easy to spend more than you have expected to. Usually, when I went to St. Louis Pagan Picnic, and I went for years and years and years and years, and I plan to go next year. But this last couple of years, between health and other things, I have not gone. Um, but I usually just went to meet people, to do interviews and video, and to enjoy the event because I usually didn't have much of a budget for buying anything. Um, but I enjoyed looking at all the things, which um, was a very creative experience for me. Um, but I think that development of portraiture, I think the development of artwork itself, which is well back in prehistory, probably greatly changed how people looked at their environment. I don't see how it couldn't have. Um, we don't really know exactly how and when artwork developed. We are reasonably certain it only goes back a certain amount of time in human history, but that time keeps getting pushed backwards, which is true with almost everything. The ridiculous idea that you find among certain conservative Christian groups that the earth is only 4,000 years old has never seemed more ridiculous than in light of what we know about history now. Um, Things that we once thought were relatively recent developments, we now know go back tens of thousands of years. In some cases, hundreds of thousands of years, much farther than we once thought. And we now know that artwork goes back farther than we realized. And I'm sure we'll only find it goes back farther. But the ability to create that way represents a very particular mental process, which is, as far as I know, basically unique to humanity, although everything we ever thought was unique to humanity is largely being shown not to have been unique. So I don't want to put too much emphasis on that. But we do seem to be the people who, the creatures who put a lot of time into artwork. And that requires a certain way of conceptualizing things, including what your artwork is going to look like before you do it or while you're doing it. If you can't predict what you're about to create, you're not going to be able to create it. Um, and I think it must have changed how we looked at the world significantly when we first began doing artwork on an individual basis. And I think that when we learned about portraiture, it changed how we looked at ourselves. Now, I wanted to talk about allegory, and I consider allegory to be a very important point in most of what we might term pagan cultures for the sake of argument. The term pagan is subject to far more controversy than it used to be. I'm not wanting to get into that conversation just now, but if we talk about Egypt and Greece and Rome and various other places, allegorical artwork is important in all these places. And what is allegory? Allegory is using one thing to represent another, usually something that seems very simple to represent a much more complex idea. This is how the myth of Persephone and Hades, for example, can simultaneously be used as um, a teaching mythos for the seasons, the cycle of life, death, and reincarnation, um, ideas about incarnation in the first place, and ideas about how the role of joy in life. There are so many things that people get out of that one single myth, which goes so far beyond what happens in the myth. That is an example of allegory. Another example of allegory is that we often see allegorical artworks, and many ancient images of pagan deities have highly allegorical aspects to them, in terms of symbolism, in terms of how they're portrayed, and certainly in the modern pagan world, it's a big thing. What's so good about this? Um, I consider allegory a significantly better way of teaching advanced ideas than writing. I've done a lot of writing in my life, and one of the things I will say about all of my books is if you read all of them, you'll notice they're all written in the same voice. Um, Even when I sometimes have someone helping me, the voice of the author does not change from one book to the next. It's obviously me. Um, and those who know what I'm referring to know what I'm referring to. But you find that sometimes in people who've had their work ghostwritten. Um, but you can. I've had people tell me they can actually hear my voice when they read things I've written because it's so clearly in the way that I speak. Um, but when it comes to teaching higher concepts, I really think that artwork is a superior medium. And one of the reasons is that, well, we see it, to make yet another reference to conservative Christianity, we see it in their constant attempts to take their Bible literally. The Bible actually isn't a bad book if you interpret it largely symbolically and within the context of its history and times. But if you try to take it literally, it's horrible. Um, it has terrible things in it if you're taking them literally, um, including many of the things that are represented as highly virtuous, like Isaac and his son. Um, but artwork, on the other hand, really does not lend itself in the same way to literal interpretation, because everyone who looks at artwork is going to see what they see. And it may not be the same thing for every viewer. It's not always even the same thing that the artist intended. Um, and Reverend Mary in the chat room says, "This is very true. I hear you in all your books." And, people tell me that. I think I have a very distinct way of speaking. Um, I was looking at Facebook this morning, as I sometimes do, and I saw a post saying that the best book in every language is the dictionary. When I was a child, I read dictionaries and encyclopedias for fun. I seriously did. And I was heavily versed in things like Shakespeare before puberty. And all of these have kind of influenced the way that I speak, together with other things I've talked about on other occasions. And I'm actually quite pleased with that. Um, it's not easy to try to counterfeit my voice, even though I've seen some people try to do that. Um, but I tend to express myself in very particular ways. And I do the same in artwork. My artistic style isn't so terribly unique. When I do black and white artwork, I sometimes look at black and white artwork by other artists and have to take a moment to say, did I do that? Um, because it's a common style, developed specifically for things like the pagan press, where I was first well known, which required a certain kind of artwork. My color artwork is more individual, but the way that I do the artwork is also very individual. The style isn't always, because it had to be done a certain way for black and white publication. But I'd like to say the way that I handled the subject matter was pretty unique. And Lady Bitterwind, who I often refer to, was a big influence on my way of thinking and doing things. And she was a great believer in what she called patterning, which is very much what we're talking about with allegory, the idea that you put layers of meaning into what you do, artwork or otherwise. And I find that my artwork, and this was a case from very early on, often you can look at it and just take it for what it is, but if you go back and look again, you'll frequently see things you didn't see the first time. I'm told the same is true for my writing. And Christina in the chat room says, this is also true for music. Music can also be interpreted so differently from one listener to another. And this is very true. I can think of certain pieces of music that some people think as being sad. Others think of as being atmospheric. Others find inspirational, but it's all the same music. And this is true for artwork too. The simplest form is color. To me, the color blue is one of my favorite colors. It was my mother's favorite color before me. And when I was a child, it wasn't necessarily my favorite color, but as I grew older, I really came to like blue for a lot of purposes. Um, I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favorite for every purpose, but it's my favorite for a lot of purposes, because I find it a wonderful expresser of emotion, um, particularly in a kind of peaceful, meditative sort of way, although it can also express emotions in very different ways. But that's how I particularly enjoy using it. I find it a very calming color. But I know other people find it a sad color or a depressing color. And it's really a matter of what you bring to it. The same is true for much more complex pieces of art. What you perceive is not necessarily just what you see, it's everything you bring to it. And this is what makes art such a useful way of expressing ideas and teaching complex subjects, because your ability to receive it has so much to do with what you actually see, what you come away with. With writing, someone can say, oh no, it has to mean exactly what it says in a literal way, because writing can be taken that way. Artwork can't always be taken that way. Sometimes, yes, you can say this is obviously a portrait of a certain moment in time. But even then, if you look at, for example, the works of Vermeer, on one hand, they're an everyday still life of everyday activities, but you can also get a lot of symbolic meaning out of it. And that's what art does for you. And yeah, I've been an artist starting at the age of 3, although what I was calling artwork at 3 wouldn't pass for it now. And I was encouraged to this by my father, who was also an artist. Um, my maternal grandfather was also an artist, so I was surrounded by art growing up, and I find it to be a wonderful way to communicate. I also express it in other parts of my life, and um, the way that I dress is part of that too. To me, when I put together an outfit, it's an artistic expression. And that's one of the reasons I dress the way that I do. It's certainly not the only reason, but it's one of them, because I find it very creative to put together different colors to create a particular look. Like matching this tie with this shirt. I went through 3 different ties before I decided on this one. Um, and it brought through more the spirit I wanted for today. But the process of selecting it was very creative. It was very empowering to my soul. Selecting this particular tie brooch, or whatever we want to call it. Can't really call it a tie pin because it's not a pin, but whatever we want to call it, I went through several to get to it too. And for the same reason, it's an artistic expression. It gives me joy to put these colors and elements together. It's one of the reasons I do it. Um, and that brings us back just briefly to Gaia Thrift, because one of the things that we're planning to do in connection with Gaia Thrift is Don's Closet, where we'll be talking about things like um, how I dress and why I dress, but also how you can dress, things that we will have at the store, and things you can do with them that you might not first think of. I don't exactly know how this is all going to take shape, but I'm kind of looking forward to it because this has been such a thing in my life. And over the course of this weekend, I've been putting up memories on Facebook from previous St. Louis pagan picnics and looking at my wardrobe from those previous years when I looked quite different. But one of the things I noticed 7 years ago, I was wearing a blue pinstriped suit that I was very fond of. Um, and it was an interesting thing to remember that suit that I haven't had for a long time now. Um, Other interesting ways that I've put clothing together, to me, clothing has been an adventure. I know a lot of people just throw on whatever clothing is handy, and I totally don't understand that. It's completely removed from my experience. Um, and then, I was raised by a family of clothes horses, most of whom put a lot of thought into how they dressed. So I came by it honestly, but it's very much been part of my personality. And Renee says, "Wow, what a great idea, Don." Well, it was Edward's idea, but it's a great idea. I'm looking forward to it. And hello to Tina, Tina Chevery in the chat room. It's good to see you, Tina. With this, we've come to the end of our half hour. Tomorrow, I'm going to have an interview with the Most Reverend Alyssa Maxenkemp, First Priestess of the Corellian tradition, and we'll be talking most likely about the recent investiture and lustration and the future and what the future holds for the Corellian tradition today. I hope you'll join me for that. And on Wednesday, of course, we'll have Chris Copeland, and haven't set up Thursday yet, but we'll have it presently. So I hope that you have a wonderful day. I love spending this time with you. I hope that you enjoy spending it with me. And I love the fact that we can talk directly. And going back to that subject of techno magic, in a manner of speaking, this is a kind of physicalized telepathy. That's a point that Ed the Pagan loves to make, that we're living in a telepathic world thanks to technology. And as technology continues to develop, that's going to become far truer than it is now. Now it's similar to what we think of it as telepathy, but in the future, it may be a much more literal physicalization of that ability. And I'm very curious to see what that brings to society, what it brings to us, and how it develops our future magic when things that we once had to work to develop in that way become physicalized like this. I think it's going to be a very interesting ride. So thank you, everyone, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to continue to be with us and to guide us as we go forward, and to help us to express ourselves in the world in a joyful and eloquent manner. Help us to clearly express our ideas and our emotions, and to have that clarity within as well as without. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you're always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed now and always, and I will